Okay, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to get started as it's 5 after. We had quite a few registrations today, but understanding everybody's schedule, I'm sure people will log in as they become available. But we have some really, really great content for you today. And I'm going to kick us off and get started. Thanks so much for registering for today's session on designing work for happiness. We're really excited to share some new research and insights that we've been working on over the past couple of months. Myself and Ashley I'll introduce her in a little bit, but really the goal of today's session is to kind of get at some new perspectives and insights around what happiness at work actually means and how it can start to become a little bit more actionable. So you might have seen on the screen that was up when you logged in that we're going to be exploring a couple of different interactive components in today's session. And we're going to use the platform Mentimeter to do that. So it's going to happen a little bit later in the session, but if you want to prepare right now, if you have a smartphone or an additional tab available, open www.menti.com and key in the code 46169582 if you want to participate. And you should be able to ask questions using this tab throughout, hoping to make it a bit more of an interactive dynamic session today. So that we'll remind you of the code and everything in a little bit too. Oh my goodness, I have a chat already. Yes, there we go. Thank you, Ashley, for putting that in the chat for everybody as well. And also a note, we're very agnostic in terms of how you choose to participate today. So if you want to raise your hand or use the chat or leverage Menti to ask a question, by all means, we welcome all different avenues and forms of feedback. So I mentioned Ashley's name a couple of times. So right now I want to just introduce ourselves and talk a little bit more about our background. So my name's Chelsea. I am the founder and lead strategist at Drift Employer Brand. I have about 10 years in the employee experience and employer brand space, bringing to life human-centric, authentic EVPs across the board for employers from all different industries. I'm super passionate about the human-centric employee experience and iterating and innovating on the worker-company relationship. It's where a huge breadth of my interest lies. So I'm excited to be talking to you about this subject today.
I can learn to understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way you talk.
I think
I need your permission to help.
Perhaps let me just do one more piece of housekeeping. If everybody could just put themselves on mute, that'd be amazing, because I know most of us are probably still working from home, so we have a ton of background noise to think about. I know my cat might start making noise in a bit. So if everyone could just put yourselves on mute, that'd be great. It'd be great for everyone's experience. So that's me. It's a little bit about me, Chelsea, and I'm going to kick it over to my co-presenter, Ashley, who is a friend and collaborator in the industry for a long time now. And I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Ashley. I'm excited to be here today because we picked the topic between Chelsea and I. We have many years of experience in the employer brand and employee experience space. And I currently work at LinkedIn as an account director, where I advise some of the biggest companies across Canada with global presence on how to build their employer brand and also be thinking very seriously about their employee experience and listening to their employees. And when Chelsea approached me to say, let's collaborate and do a session together, I was like, absolutely. But of course, we wanted to pick a topic that was fun. And so we picked this topic because we believe that fun's important to be integrated into the workplace. And what usually fun translates into is happiness. And so how are we thinking about happiness in the workplace? And this doesn't feel like any kind of extra work for either of us, because it's something that we had a really great time doing and researching. So I'll pass it back over to you, Chelsea.
Absolutely. I think that we're both really similarly minded in that, we love delving into the strategy and the theory and the philosophy behind all of these concepts, but we also like taking it to that level where, like, how do we make it actionable and how do we operationalize happiness and what does all of this mean? So that's what we're going to be looking at primarily in the session today, is kind of demystifying and unpacking happiness at work, how it relates to well-being, how it creates more success and productivity for your organization as a whole, and where it fits kind of in the evolution of the employee experience as we know it today. All of this is informed by a lot of research and insight that we're bringing to the table from both our worlds. Ashley from the LinkedIn end, and myself from kind of being deep in the industry, working with clients from multiple different sectors. We brought everything together, everything that we kind of know right now about happiness, to create a little bit more of a breadth of knowledge around A, why does it matter? And B, how do we make it meaningful, and how do we make it actionable within the employee experience, understanding that every organization is different. So what we want you to walk away from this session today is we want you to leave with a stronger understanding of just how important happiness is to an employee's feeling of being successful and productive and contributing at work, and some tangible and really specific actions that you can take to prioritize the necessary steps to create that sense of happiness and fulfillment and joy within your employee experience. Ashley, anything to add there?
No, I think as, and it depends what background you're coming from, but as HR practitioners and people in the HR function, it is not easy work to do to understand how to make everybody happy. And so that's by no means what we intend on uncovering or fixing today. And happiness is individualistic. Every individual has different feelings of what makes them happy. And so I think why this topic is so near and dear to our heart is because it's a very challenging one. And it's one that, given recent events, has had a greater focus. And so what we're trying to do today is let's better understand where we came from to know how we move forward as HR professionals, as advisors, as business leaders. And as we move forward, what are the things that we can learn from other organizations that are doing this really, really well? And how do we then turn that into practice? So I think that's a perfect way to kind of dive into where we came from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I think that we need to acknowledge that this is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. I mean, we have decades of experience of kind of suppressing the workers' needs in favor of looking at what companies want. And it's only in the last couple of decades that we've really made the realization that the employee is kind of at the center of their own experience, and we should treat it that way, and we should strategize for it that way. So one more piece of housekeeping I forgot to mention, but really feel like I should, is that I am recording today's session. It'll probably appear clips of it on social media or on YouTube. So keep that in mind. I hope you all participate, but if anybody has any concerns about being featured on social channels, I just wanted to make you aware that today's session will be recorded and shared so everybody can enjoy it. And with that, we're going to start with why, as one of our favorite folks, Simon Sinek, likes to say. And I'm going to kick it back to Ashley to just talk a little bit more about the why and the what, and how kind of happiness can be positioned within the context of the evolution of a broader employee experience. So over to you, Ashley.
Yeah, this wouldn't be an HR program if we didn't quote Josh Bersin. So we have to start with this beautiful model. And as somebody who loves frameworks, this one felt so perfect to illustrate the history of employee experience. What has happened to date with regards to how our relationship works with work? And if we start back looking at the Industrial Revolution with Carl Jung in 1921 as a psychiatrist, thinking about different personality types. And that's just the basics of, obviously we're different, of course. And thinking about how different types of people behave differently. Therefore, at work, we should probably think about that. But back then, the relationship between work and people was very much, we have this expectation around, you come to work and we pay you, and you live here for the rest of your life. You don't go anywhere. You stay with us. And so that social contract was very specific back then. And then as we start to kind of evolve, and we think of Gallup research, which is much more prominent in the conversations we have today, they thought more about, what are employees like when they have a friend at work and they have a best friend at work, and they're more, is that more predictive of employee retention? Of course it is, because you're happy. And then we think of the future world that we sort of still live in, with like this Yelp-like tools everywhere, where we have pulse surveys and we're constantly giving feedback. We're rating our Uber driver, they're rating us. everything is being rated. And that builds on this always on feedback to now form into what Burson calls this define and design employee experience. And so when we think of these different elements of how we've kind of thought about the relationship between employee and employer, and then our focus has been very different throughout the history of it as well, where in the 90s, we thought about output. How do we make people more productive? How do we have them come in the door and then treat clients with the utmost happiness and positivity in order to sell more, to do better, to whatever the output is that they're measuring? And then we took a step back and we realized, we can force output all we want, but if we're not understanding the reason for why people stay at an organization, we spend a lot of money with them coming in and leaving, coming in and leaving, and retraining and hiring costs and all these other items. So retention should now be our focus, and employee engagement are the words that we're going to speak out of our mouths constantly. And we're still talking about employee engagement today. And then this feedback and response cycle started to come about as we thought about that employee voice survey, and we're pulsing once a year. Now we're talking about pulsing multiple times a year. And we think about the feedback and response cycle focused around culture, and focused around the fact that if we're not building culture, if we don't understand our culture, if we're not making our values very open and honest and authentic as a value proposition to people, how do they know even that they want to come work for us specifically? And then how do we make sure that we're infusing their needs and their wants into our culture? And then finally, much closer to where we think we are today, but not quite, because I think there's been so much that's happened in the world, and we'll talk about that. So design for success was where Josh Burson left this diagram. He said, today forward, design for success, productivity combined with well-being, end-to-end design of the employee experience. Thinking of HR as end-to-end work design is going to be our future thinking in how we talk about employee experience and we build a better employee experience for our employees. Chelsea and I sat down and we said, this was built from 2010 to today, and then today forward, meaning around the time of pre-pandemic. And we agree that you need to define and design your employee experience. But we also think that given some of the recent historic events, i.e. a global pandemic, the Great Resignation, recession, however we want to call it, the Great Reset, some people are calling it, that's impacting how we go forward. We can pretend like we don't want it to. We can pretend like we can go back to a version of normal. But the reality is people are thinking differently. And people are redefining their relationship with work, how they want to work, when they want to work, what they want to do for work in ways that we've never seen historically before. So if we flip forward, there's a few things that are resulting in some of these thoughts. So there's one phenomenon called COVID clarity, and I'm sharing this based on our LinkedIn economist team. And our chief economist, actually, Karen Kimbrough, was on a session yesterday that LinkedIn hosted. And I really love, she was asked in a few sentences, like, what is the future of building an HR function or HR leadership or being a CHRO or what have you? How do we think of talent in the future? And she said, we have to think about how to change the world of work to make it more equitable, dynamic, and fulfilling. She literally highlighted fulfilling or happiness as a piece of that. Equitable, of course, it's something we need to redefine the contract that we have with work and the employee experience, because quite frankly, it was designed for a very particular type of people. Like if we're thinking about the diversity element of how we're rethinking work, diversity and inclusion, the type of work that we used to do was created in constructs of a family wage, of a male being in the workforce. And a lot of things that were built around how work and our relationship with an employer would look was defined on things that no longer even exist. So in a way, this pandemic, this COVID clarity, this ability to step back and think about things around compensation, around alignment with my values and who I am, and obviously wanting the need around fulfillment or career advancement. And career advancement, I think, is a word that we might not even use in the future. I think we're going to talk about equitable, dynamic, and fulfilling work in different ways. And fulfillment doesn't necessarily mean career advancement for every person. It means growth mindset, ability to learn new things, And so I think that it's going to be really interesting as we all have COVID clarity and we reflect on our jobs and why people are changing jobs, that we're going to be asking more of employers to think of what the future construct or contract of work looks like as a relationship to an employee. So this is getting kind of in the detail of the science behind employee experience, our social contract with work, and some of the phenomenons. And another big phenomenon really we can't ignore as professionals in the HR world is around the Great Resignation, the big quit. And we have a lot of data tracking what's happening in the US specifically, because mostly just Canadian economic data doesn't track every little detail. And we know that we're very similar to the US in a lot of ways when it comes to employment. But one thing to call out is 1 in 4 Canadians indicate that their personal and work lives has worsened since the pandemic. So that's LifeWorks mental health index. And why I wanted to call that out is it's extremely important that we are realizing that before the pandemic, burnout existed. Burnout has always been here. And Jen Fisher, the chief wellbeing officer at Deloitte, had a very interesting comment about this in yesterday's LinkedIn session, that the bar for company culture is rising. It's constantly rising. And people, like I said, are reevaluating all these things, the where that they work, the when that they work, the how that they work. And burnout has been a conversation of HR, and well-being has been something that we've talked about before the pandemic. I think we all had the inklings of we need a well-being team or a well-being employee that focuses on this, that helps us with this, the strategy around it, how we integrate it in our day-to-day. But the pandemic exposed the realities of burnout. It allowed us to have conversations about it. It allowed us to have team meetings to focus on prioritization and making sure we take time off, but it always existed. And so the big quit combined with this, or these emotions around the burnout and the stress and these feelings, combined with COVID clarity and the realization that, do I like what I'm doing? Do I like where I'm at in terms of the values that this organization has and what I feel? And allowing us to reevaluate that. And there's people leaving jobs for no jobs, but just for the purpose of having mental health and safety around their well-being. The amount of people who've needed to take leave that never even understood the definition of anxiety before 2 years ago. These are real things that people are going through, and taking a step back and deciding, I only have one life to live on this planet, and do I want to live it in this way? And of course, this ties back to happiness, because we know that most of us, one of our goals naturally is to live a happy life, a healthy, happy life. And the well-being of ourselves has been something that we've had to put at the forefront, because we've rubbed up against either going into a frontline workplace where you are nervous or scared to contract a disease that we don't fully understand, or you are working 12-hour days in front of a laptop, having back, knee problems, things at a young age that you never thought you'd have. I know people who've had to take leave for different variations of eye issues. My eyes have changed. I've had to get deeper prescriptions. There's all these things that are implementing, or that are affecting us as we implement a new way of work during the pandemic. And now we're being brought to the end of it and having to ask the question, well, what's next? What's the new normal of work? Mm-hmm. In addition to the big quit, we obviously have the Great Resignation, or the Great Reshuffle as well. So some people aren't just quitting for, the sake of resignation, but also looking at, where else do my interests lie? Where else can I take my transferable skills? And this one I think is quite exciting, because I made a career pivot right before the pandemic. And I know, Chelsea, you've made a career pivot yourself.
I have, yes. Yeah. So everything that you're saying is really resonating with me, because, whether or not whether or not the numbers line up, I think that we can all attest that there is kind of a cultural zeitgeist happening right now, where there's just a little bit more even like permissiveness around leaving a current situation to seek more fulfillment. And whether that's to go and find a new opportunity or create your own opportunity like I did, I think that the reverberating impacts of this are going to be huge. And I don't think it's deniable that the primary driver of people making these decisions is happiness. I'm not happy. For me, I wasn't happy with a extremely secure, extremely well-paid corporate job. So in the middle of the pandemic, I decided to quit and start my own company. And here I am giving a webinar with my friend Ashley, and it's been extremely challenging and very scary. But for me, on a personal level, I can say that I was not fulfilled in my job. So I walked away from potentially a lifetime of security and took a massive risk. And I do believe that the cultural moment that's happening right now around the worker organization relationship is responsible for a lot of situations just like mine. So I think it bears consideration, the happiness of it all, the happiness dialogue. And I think that's where we're going.
Absolutely. And so that brings us to kind of what's next, right? And so we have added to Josh Berson's model of the history of employee experience, bringing us to 2020 and 2022, living through the pandemic, where we were designing for success. Productivity and well-being was definitely top of mind. But we actually would love if Josh Berson eventually added to his and gave us his thinking around what's next. But today forward, we redefined as we have to design for life. There's no such thing as like this work-life balance anymore. It is work needs to be designed for my life. I'm living, my life comes first, I come first, and work's a part of that life. No longer am I ever going to think of work as 50% of that life. Work has to be ingrained into my life in a way that makes me happy. And so some of the practices that we highlighted that are necessary in order for this new model or this new path forward are we need to be agile. We need to change things quickly. HR can't be 10 years behind to make somebody happy today. And so I'll give you a great example from LinkedIn. I was really, really proud of us where we have a allotted amount with our benefits, a fund, a sludge fund, if you will, and we're allowed to use that for certain things. And initially it was for childcare, dog walking, and getting a gym membership. And then during the pandemic, that became kind of useless because nobody wanted to come to your house and walk your dog. I couldn't go to the gym, and childcare was closed down. So within that year, they pulled together very quickly, kind of had a design thinking session and said, okay, well, we need to rethink this benefit seriously so that it's not going to just work for them immediately as employees, but in the future as well. So they opened it up to allow us to buy at-home workout equipment, which I put towards my Peloton, which I absolutely love. I don't work for them at all, but I will plug that it's made me very happy at home. And with my work at home being, challenging to get up and walk around on a regular basis, they allowed us to
endorphins going.
Endorphins, yeah, exactly. They allowed us to put it towards sessions that are virtual. So if I wanted to do a dance class virtually, and that's how I was going to get my exercise in, then it could be approved for something like that. And then again, we're pivoting out of the pandemic, and maybe I don't want to work from home every day. I mean, I still love my Peloton, but some people might not want to. And so they added, in addition to all the things from the past 2 years that we could use it towards, now this mini buffet dollar value can be used towards travel, because so many people have expressed that in the last 2 years, the inability to go places, to be free, to explore the world, other cultures, learn by experience, learn by taste, by speaking languages that they're trying to learn, all of these things has been their number one interest in terms of what's going on in their life and what would make them happy. And so I thought that was so powerful, because one type of benefit in one big scheme of an organization's HR offerings pivoted 3 times during the last 2 years to be designed for life. And agility is necessary, because to design for life means that we have to think of things as an evolution, things that can constantly be built upon, not programs and practices that we build once and we let sit there for multiple years. It needs to break constructs. We can't be okay with saying what we did before will work for the future, especially if we're trying to create a diverse and inclusive culture. What happened in the past, we know, is not what's going to make us successful in the future in creating a diverse and inclusive teams. Aligning values, making sure that it's very clear as an organization what values you believe in, so that people can self-select in and agree that, yes, this is the right place for me, the right choice for me, the right spot for me. And the more transparent we are about that, I think the better we will be with regards to turnover. There's some people who like working many hours a day, and not saying that to be coy. Some people enjoy the grind, but then they are very clear that they want flexibility to take time off whenever they want and whenever they please. So get rid of the 20-day vacation that they have and let them work as hard as they want, but take off time when they want. And so there's these things that these constructs that I think we need to leave in the past. And we need to think about being very clear about, this is what it means to work for us. This is what we believe in. And if you're aligned with that, you're going to be happy. So really, the end-to-end work design is no longer exactly where we think we are from a phase perspective in this final phase, or this phase for now. We think it's about human-centric design. Thinking about humans first, putting humans at the center of everything. And again, why this is not something that's so easy to do overnight is because it's breaking a lot of the rules, the barriers, the roadblocks that people before have created in an organization within the HR function. The other thing that makes it challenging is not all humans are exactly the same. And so our offerings need to consider people from all different backgrounds, from all different experiences, and what makes them happy might not be the exact same thing that makes your friend happy. And so thinking about these things is extremely important. And also aligning our values is extremely important to pick the right organizations and show what kind of organization we are to allow people to self-select in.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Definitely. I've always thought that end-to-end kind of implied, something that's very linear. And I think what we're moving towards now is a more kind of like circular understanding of the employee experience as kind of like a life cycle, as opposed to, something that starts and finishes. So
exactly. And that example just on like the specific benefits offering, just that one example could have been linear. They could have set up benefits, set up the construct, said, yep, this is what it can be used for. This is what it can't be used for. And then they changed it. And they could have said, oh man, we just went through this and we just changed it, right? How many times have I heard that with other HR professionals where we're like, we just finished this project.
I know.
And then they had to reopen that, revisit that again. And so I just thought that that's a great example of work's never done. And to have people to iterate and build on those pieces is really important. And I value it as an employee, especially. Very grateful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you're coming into a situation like that, there's a start and finish to the work, you're almost setting yourself up for a situation where as soon as you finish it, you kind of have to restart it again. So that agile thinking and like the continuous improvement mindset is much more aligned with the employee experience of the future, I think.
Absolutely.
So thanks for that. That was awesome. An awesome breakdown of kind of the what and the how. I'm seeing a chat. Oh, sorry, I can only stay for half. Oh, thanks, Christy. Thanks for coming. So that was the kind of the what and the what and the why of happiness at work. So now I want to get into a little bit more kind of around the neuroscience and the behavioral psychology behind it, and ultimately kind of start to pose a bit of an answer to the question, now knowing what we know, how do we start to design an experience that is more human-centric and has happiness kind of at its core? So we kind of get the idea of, why it's important, but now we need to operationalize it. But before I dive into all of that, let me just check our chat again. Perfect. Now, before I dive into all of that, I want to start with a bit of a personal anecdote. So if you've worked with me as a client, anybody kind of knows that I love to start with my why and kind of my purpose. And it happened kind of within my origin story. So I grew up in Newfoundland right at the height of the cod moratorium. So I saw, absolute devastation on an economic scale, as well as on an identity scale, from, classmates and their parents who kind of had to abandon this ancestral way of life and this livelihood that it's all that they had known for so long, and walk away from it. Obviously, it was it's extremely critical environmental protection measure to take, but it did strip a lot of people of, this sense of identity and this sense of connection to their purpose. And, when you read about it and you kind of delve into the actual human impact of it, and you see kind of, the questions that were asked of the media and the fishermen at the time, why do you feel this way? You know, like, what are you missing? And they reported this kind of this what was missing for them, and what they were really kind of longing for was this sense of fulfillment and equilibrium, and essentially just a deep-seated happiness that came from the visceral emotional nature of their work and how connected they felt to it. The sense that they were serving a higher purpose and providing for their families, and, you know, aligning to an ancestral way of life, as well as the camaraderie and the interpersonal connection that happened when you're in such extreme situations with a team of people, and the mutual respect that developed from that. All of these things were really critical to the fishery workers' happiness. And once those careers were gone and they had to make their way in other industries, you know, it was devastation for them, because it was something that they really grieved and they lost. Now, were their lives always perfectly in balance, and were they always having an amazing time getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go out in the boat? No, absolutely not. But, you know, their sense of connection to that work and their love for it ran so deep that, you know, they really reported it as kind of like a hit to their identity and their sense of belonging and their sense of purpose. So for me, looking back on kind of where I drew my initial inspiration for pursuing a career in this strategy space, I see a lot of evidence for the importance of being happy and connected to your work and connected to your team and the people who do your work around you, you know, as kind of a driver for ultimate fulfillment and feeling successful. So for me, that's a little bit of a backstory around, you know, how I connect to happiness at work and how I see it as such an important lever of experience. But, you know, we really have to kind of go back into the history of happiness at work and how it kind of started to become a concept in order to understand how to operationalize it in kind of our current work setting. So it's been around, not necessarily happiness at work hasn't been around for a while, but kind of observing workers' behavior and kind of thinking about their experience has been around since, you know, the early 1910s, 1920s, just very shortly after the Industrial Revolution. We kind of saw the first piece of evidence of an organization actually caring about how their employees felt. And it was through this largely failed and debunked experiment called the Hawthorne effect, where they looked at the impact of lighting on employees' moods, and all of their research turned out to be pretty unsubstantiated. However, what they did realize, unwittingly kind of, it was a correlation between being picked for the experiment, the workers who were chosen to participate in this and had knowledge that they were being observed, and the increase in productivity. So there was an inference to be made, but it wasn't around the physical and work environment as they had thought, but more around when people believe kind of they're being recognized, or there's, you know, a certain level of attentiveness to them, they tend to perform better. So that was really the only learning that came out of that. Obviously, there was a ton of research done in between the 20s and the 90s, but in my opinion, the biggest disruption in, you know, the concept of employee experience and happiness at work was through the advent of positive psychology in around the 1990s. And essentially, positive psychology is just an iteration or a build on the humanistic movement that we saw kind of exemplified by Abraham Maslow. And if you didn't think it was a HR presentation at the Josh Bersin reference, it's definitely an HR presentation when we bring up Abraham Maslow. But I consider this as kind of like the 2.0 movement of that initial kind of foray of psychologists into the well-being space. So essentially, positive psychology is a study of, you know, what makes life worth living, and, you know, what activities and what things do people engage in that enhance their life end to end, and why do we seek happiness in this way? And, you know, it's been quite popularized in mainstream discourse. You probably are thinking of like Marie Kondo or Rutger Bregman, Humankind, talking about the inherent good nature of people, and how we're actually wired for kindness and positivity, as opposed to kind of what's been promoted in mainstream media. But it didn't take very long for positive psychology to kind of make its way into workforce strategy. In 1998, it was chosen by the president of the American Psychological Association as like his theme for his term as president. His name was Martin Seligman. And it was only 12 years later in 2010 that the researcher C.D. Fisher defined happiness at work through the lens of positive psychology. So this is where we start to see that transition point between positive psychology, seeking a deeper understanding of what makes people happy, and then taking that and applying it to workforce strategy. So you can see that, his research led him to a couple of different key kind of dimensions, he called them, of happiness at work. Effective organizational commitment. So does the organization care and commit to the well-being and happiness of their employees? Engagement, are the workers engaged with their work? And job satisfaction, are they happy with the work that they're doing? So the disconnect here is that, with studies like this, it kind of stops at, the what and the why. So now we know what motivates employees to be happy, but it's really up to each individual organization to take up the charge and figure out how that comes to life for them, for their specific culture and their specific workforce. So there's still a lot of work to do, having defined what happiness at work looks like through the lens of positive psychology. And I think that some of the efforts and the criticism that have come to the fore around positive psychology and happiness as a concept, you'll see down at the bottom in 2017, a guy named William Davies wrote a book called The Happiness Industry. And the criticism is that, now governments and corporations are kind of appropriating the term happiness and commodifying it, as opposed to kind of looking at it in a more genuine and altruistic sense. And I think that that's really where the disconnect is. It's about taking all of the theory and what we know about the psychological levers that inspire happiness, and in applying it in a meaningful, humanistic way to our employee experience, not in a capitalistic way, not in a corporate focused, corporate lens, corporate view way, in a human experience, an employee experience first way. We apply the learnings and what we know about happiness to our employee experience. And I think that now we're kind of in a second wave of disruption around employee experiences, given everything that Ashley just talked about. There's really no choice anymore. Like, we kind of have to do this work around our employee experience. And I know a lot of us I know for me, I look to more contemporary thinkers like Adam Grant and Brene Brown. They are strategists kind of in the just, the humanistic sense, but they do produce a lot of really great insight around the workforce and workplace culture and establishing your boundaries and what happiness means and finding your purpose. So these are all of the kind of unstructured things that exist out there in the ether that we can pull and grab onto to construct some sort of an understanding of happiness at work. But what I really want to get to is, how do we make it meaningful? How do we make it impactful when it comes to the actual lived experiences of employees? And that's what I want to dive into right now. So this is really one of the few studies actually that exists in like our current kind of very contemporary times around happiness at work. And it's out of the University of Cyprus. So this is really kind of an exemplification of how certain demographics and how certain organizations have taken it upon themselves to try to find tangible, tactical, practical ways of taking the dimensions of happiness at work as we understand them through the lens of positive psychology, and actually coming up with key motivators for happiness. So think of it, of taking it, from up here. Okay, so we understand vaguely what the dimensions are. Now we want to double click down onto those and reveal some of the tangible motivators that we can start, hinging strategies to and building initiatives around and building programs around to actually affect positive change for our employees. So this study looked at female hospitality employees at 4- and 5-star hotels in Turkey. It was a very kind of fraught demographic at the time the study was conducted. Unsafe working conditions were reported, low gender equity, not a lot of engagement with the work, not a lot of motivation or a connection to a purpose. So it was a little bit of a prime demographic to kind of look at for what not to do, essentially. So they looked at specific kind of happiness motivators around how I can grow in my role, what the work itself looks like and what does it mean to me, how am I empowered to have relationships at work. And when they kind of ran the data and they did all of the research and focus groups and surveys with these participants, and they delved into the study, it wasn't really a very surprising conclusion that happiness does need to be a key driver of experience. And that is something that is going to be really, really critical and almost a linchpin in, the leading edge of employee experience going into the workforce of the future. So what they found is some of the tangible drivers that we can kind of map back to those key dimensions is, a positive work environment, not surprising, but kind of difficult to achieve, especially in industries like hospitality, where you're dealing with guests, sometimes unhappy guests. How do you ensure physical and psychological safety across the board? It's a big question. Growth and advancement opportunities. To Ashley's point, we're moving even past the advancement conversation, but I think this is really around transparency around career paths and, like, what are my options once I get in there? Do I have to leave your organization to move on, or can I do that inside your organization? And how am I supported to do that? Appreciation for contributions. And we might be able to even draw a line back to that 1920s experiment. It's possible that those workers felt recognized by their participation, and that's why they were more productive. But now we know, based on studies like this one, that that's absolutely true. And if you are contributing and being recognized for that on a regular basis, you are happier. And then, of course, last but absolutely not least, is the support for that camaraderie, and that interpersonal connection is just so important when it comes to happiness. So nothing super surprising. I wanted to, yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to add to that piece, or that area of focus around happiness at work and some of the research done in the past. And I think there was a really cool, I write down quotes a lot. I have like a book of quotes, and another quote that I want to share with everybody was Crystal Gaskin, Chief People Officer at MailChimp. She was speaking yesterday on how they're really focused at MailChimp on shifting from output to outcome. So I even think about some of those historical studies where, people with a clipboard are standing behind you, and like, yes, that's going to make you work harder. But even thinking of taking that a step further, it's not even just about like, am I a cog in the machine making more light bulbs or whatever I'm making in the factory? But it's like, am I actually bringing ideas to how to make this light bulb even better for the environment, longer lasting? And so pivoting from that output to outcome piece and redefining how you measure success, I think, is part of that go forward piece that we were talking about in that final element of what we reiterated as Burson's history of employee experience. And Crystal mentioned, creating autonomy on what success looks like, setting the context of what we're trying to achieve together, and then giving employees flexibility and the autonomy of how that gets done is another key element. And I think it wrappers around a lot of the pieces of those drivers that Chelsea just walked through. So how do I feel like I'm being recognized? Well, it's when I'm driving towards a common goal that the organization's made very clear with me. And then I can see how I'm actually getting closer and closer to that goal. And I'm being recognized when I'm taking those steps to get closer and closer. If I just get like a pat on the back, like, yay, you're doing great all the time randomly. And I'm like, what am I doing great though? Am I doing myself well? Like, having that clarity around, we're driving towards something together as a community in common. That's something that matters from a happiness perspective. And then also getting recognition on getting closer to that goal is super key. So I just wanted to like also wrap that around, like, when we think of the world of work, at the end of the day, we all need to get a job done. We can't all show up to work and just have a blast of a time, smile and laugh and not have anything come out of it. As an employer, I'd be like, no, that's not going to work for me. Right. So wanted to wrap that around it as well.
Absolutely. And now we understand that having a blast doesn't necessarily mean you're happy. Like, it's about so much more. Overall happiness is about that connection to the work, that recognition for what you're doing. And sometimes working really hard and going through a challenging time as a team can lead you to be much happier with the work you're doing and with who you are as a member of your organization, or however you're choosing to earn your living. So wanted to jump into, that's a really great dovetail into the how of it all. So this is a model that I use at Drift to support kind of clients' understanding of a more circular kind of employee experience as opposed to a linear one. So we have the design for life and, human centricity at the heart of it. And I know this looks different from organization to organization. Everybody defines these differently, titles them differently, but this is just a general kind of overview of the different, what we call experience drivers. So if you think of your employee experience as a holistic thing, each of these different stages, moments of truth, I've heard them called a bunch of different things. These are all the influencing factors in shaping your experience driver. So the first step to uncovering and strategizing against a happier employee experience is finding out which of your experience drivers are the least happy for your employees. And this involves a lot of bottom-up employee feedback. That is really going to be the crux and the linchpin of all of your strategization against a happier employee experience, or just your employee experiences in general, is involving the employees at the ground level. So whether it's surveys, whether it's focus groups, whether it's an ongoing kind of pulse check embedded into your social intranet, however you choose to gather the data, you need to lead with an understanding of where your biggest threats to your happiness of your employees lie, inside of which experience drivers. So we'll take a low-hanging fruit one, which we know is extremely important in the holistic well-being space. So perhaps you uncover through a series of employee-focused research that your well-being offering is not making employees feel as supported as they potentially could, and leading to, kind of a detriment to their happiness. They're not feeling like they're being taken care of in that genuine way. So the next step is calibration. Calibrate for happiness. Figure out where the biggest gaps are in a tangible, tactical way. So as an example, maybe this is another stage of employee feedback, and you run some calibration sessions with the leadership as well as the employees, as well as the people in the strategic function who are leading well-being, and you surface those tangible gaps. And we say, well, we have an amazing well-being program. What the heck is the problem? Turns out your portal is really hard to navigate. So nobody knows where to go. Nobody knows what type of benefits they have. Nobody even knows if you have a parental leave policy. It's all there, but it's not amplified or communicated. Well, that's a pretty low-hanging piece of fruit that you can solve for. And that's your first initiative on your happiness roadmap. Create a well-being experience that is accessible and is engaging for everybody. And that's just one example. There are ways that you can do this across the employee experience and across this entire cycle. But it starts with that prioritization exercise and figuring out in a real, genuine, honest way, lifting the mask, hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly, where are we failing our employees in terms of creating that sense of connection and happiness. And then once you know where your biggest gaps are, if we go back to that example I was giving, you've just figured out that nobody knows about your well-being offering because nobody can navigate your portal. That's the first point on your roadmap. We're going to target our well-being experience for happiness, and we're going to operationalize the learning around the overall experience of our employees with our well-being offer as it exists for them on digital spaces and the way that they're able to access it. And then you start to systematically target, kind of brick by brick, what those foundational elements of your employee experience are and how you can embed a little bit more kind of employee consideration, attentiveness, and support to lend itself to a happier experience. That was an extremely quick overview of something that typically takes months to do, because going back to Ashley's initial point about all of this around the intention is that it's almost like a deconstruction of the employee experience and a rebuilding, because it's not something that will happen overnight. But the best way to do it is, I don't know if anyone's a fan of the show Ted Lasso, a very, very happy show. So if you have Apple TV, I encourage you watch it. He tells a story about these two people, these two research scientists who had, they had to categorize all of these birds for this biology study. And there was something like 25,000 birds. It was just a huge flock of them, all different genus and species. And they looked at it. And one guy looked to the other and he said, how are we going to do this? How are we going to figure out what all of these birds are? And the other guy looked at him and he said, bird by bird. And that's the only way to do it. bird by bird. You target the micro experiences in service of creating the macro experience rooted in happiness. So now we have some case studies to jump into. I know we only have 7 minutes left, but Ashley, I think, was going to kick off with the case study piece of it. Anything else to add on that last piece, Ashley?
No, I think like we mentioned that this isn't going to be easy. Defining happiness and creating a construct of values for an organization that works for the future expectations of employees isn't easy, isn't going to happen overnight. But I think one thing that we can all, and this is part of COVID clarity, part of taking a pause, reflecting on our own D&I journey, just to add that other very important element, is that we can't do what we did before. We're not going to fix the world overnight. We're not going to fix a lot of big problems overnight, but we have to, like you said, take it bird by bird, brick by brick. And if we don't start now, we're going to be even further behind. And so it's important to start dismantling what was before, because even like we said, the wage, the way that work was structured from 9 to 5, all of those things were because that's a way that it was created in the past for a certain type of audience, for a certain type of people. And that's no longer what is going to work in the future. Like I've had many conversations with women around work flexibility prior to the pandemic and having children and trying to balance all of these things. And was work really created for them? Absolutely not. It was created for the head of the household, quote unquote, a man, to go into the office and bring home the family wage to them. So absolutely, the way that we've been doing it for generations, decades, or whatever you want to call it, it absolutely is not going to work for the future and having an inclusive and diverse work environment. And so to create that net new experience, we kind of have to blow up what we've said and done for a very long time. And that's uncomfortable for people who are still in the workplace and are HR professionals that have done things certain ways for a very long time. And it's okay to be the voice of being different. And I'd also say to those who are trying to do this in their organization already, being that voice of changing the way work was before, whether it's through policy, through programs, through offerings, through the pain points where those experience drivers are hurting employees, i.e. not making them happy. Stay strong. It's an uphill battle, but you need to be a voice on behalf of other people. That's why you got into employee experience and HR in the first place. And I would say that helping people through their journey of change is often how we implement some of these things. And also getting people that are around you that embrace evolution, that embrace that change never ends, is going to be how you build the strongest HR teams in the future.
Absolutely. So understanding that we only have 4 minutes left, I think we're going to do a quick pivot. And Ashley, maybe you can talk about your first EVP case study.
Yeah.
And then we'll just jump to some key learnings and potentially any questions. I know we have a small group today, but want to leave a minute or so for questions.
Sounds good.
All right, let's dive into Patagonia. I love
that. Patagonia is so near and dear to my heart, literally and figuratively, because I wear Patagonia sweatshirts regularly. They are very much about building a better world. So when we talk about values of a company, they want people to be outside. They want people to enjoy nature. And to do that, they need to make sure that they're not leaving a negative footprint on this earth. And in fact, they want to make this earth more healthy and fight climate change and think about how they use their materials to build their sweaters. So their philosophies are not rules, they're guidelines in which they live by. And the planet Earth essentially is what drives those philosophies and guidelines. And in like a long business model is, we'll plan 5 years, 10 years out. Dean Carter talks about as a CHRO that we talk about a long lasting business in the sense that we never want to close our doors. And if we never want to close our doors, we better have a planet for us to operate on. So our first and foremost priority is to save the planet, make sure that we can actually continue operating. Our number one business objective to open doors and keep doors open is not sales, but in fact is actually making sure that we have a planet later, because if there's no planet, there is no business. So I don't know if you know this, but 1% of top line sales goes to the environment. That's sales, not revenue, sales. They put their money where their mouth is. Their vision is clear. And the number one most important thing to them is that they care about what that they hire people that care about what they care about from an organizational perspective. So if they care about the environment, they care about the planet, they want to hire people that care about the planet and about the environment. And so they have their very strong, clear values around, we want a career that motivates you in unconventional ways, that creates big challenges. And we're talking about a clothing company. right? Like, let's take a step back. This company has so much more behind it from a value perspective, what they do in a day-to-day, how they operate, where their dollars go, rather than just creating clothing that shows up, you know, months later at a place where we donate it to. So this is not about creating a sweater that you buy 200 times in your life and you give it to somebody else later then, or you don't use it and create waste. This is about a sweater that you wear and you use and you have for most of your life. And so their resale or having more sales is not necessarily their number one target or their number one mission. It's to actually create a piece of clothing that you can pass down from generations that's going to be reusable, so to speak, within your family. And so one of the very clear messages that they have are clear values. And Dean Carter spoke about this in one of our LinkedIn Talent Connects when it was able to be live. He's very passionate and amazing CHR speaker. He spoke about how we need to really let people be the people that we hired them for. And I thought that's such an interesting concept. Let these people be who we hired them for. Meaning these are outdoors people. They kayak, they canoe, they hike, they bike, they do all the things, they surf. And most of all, they love surfing because where Patagonia's office is located. And so their CEO actually wrote a book called Let My People Surf. And the concept is, if I'm hiring people who are activists for the environment and love the environment, love being outside, why the heck would I sit them in front of a computer from 9 to 5 and say, you're never allowed to go anywhere else other than working during those time frames? So they let their people surf. It is such a simple concept. We don't have to overcomplicate creating human-centric values. They let people surf. They actually have a fund in their HR benefits program to help activists for the environment get out of jail. Yes, you heard that correctly. They don't hope anyone goes to jail. But if you are so passionate to save the environment and you want to get involved in your community and something happens in a protest where you get, you know, fined, what have you, there is a fund that Patagonia puts their money where their mouth is to help you in realizing your passion for the environment. And so let your people surf is such a simple concept, but it's so powerful and so human-centric. And it's not counterintuitive. It's thinking, if I'm hiring humans that love the outdoors and that's our mission as a company and my mission and vision is very clear as a company, then why would I tell people to behave differently as soon as I hire them?
Exactly. It's that cognitive dissonance that you want to avoid between what you say and what you do. Great case studies in the SodaStream space, as well as in the SAP space. Knowing that we're pretty much out of time, we wanted to just tag into statistics to see if there's any final questions as we wrap up. Please submit them using the chat. As we go through these, the last kind of piece of our presentation here, we're just going to talk about some of the things we really want you to take away from it. So first up is design for life. Happiness is success, and embrace the evolution. So Ashley, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Designing for life just means we need to think about the HR function and how we define employee experience differently. We need to design it for people's lives, and their lives are all very different, and we need to be aware of that. And I will just highlight on embracing the evolution as the bookend and then pass it to Chelsea. This is not something that we do once and then we forget about it. We need to constantly be evolving. We need to be thinking about how life evolves, how life changes, how expectations change in life. And we need to match that in order to meet people's well-being, create a diverse and inclusive environment for people to come to work every day in a happy place.
Absolutely. And there just needs to be a seismic shift in how we think about and measure success of our people and success of our organizations. Looking ahead to the workforce of the future, we're going to have to figure it out, how to measure happiness and how to embed happiness. And that is the true definition of what a successful organization and a successful employee looks like. And there are a lot of tangible, tactical ways that you can start to solve for happiness, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen piece by piece. The micro experiences serve the macro experience, and happiness should be a core driver of employee success across the board. And with all of that, thank you so much. This has been an incredible experience for Ashley and myself. Really appreciate those who tuned in. And this content is going to be up on YouTube and available through all of the Drift channels. As a participant, I'll be sending out the details to how to access that post session. So that's all I had. Thank you so much to Ashley for collaborating with me on this. And thanks to everybody who tuned in and participated.
Thanks, Chelsea. Bye, everybody.